This is the Ancient and Medieval History Lecture for Monday, the 24th of May, 2021. And we have talked about Robin and Marian and the High Middle Ages in England. We've begun talking about the Crusades. So, what are they before we get into today's? Well, they are Christian holy war. Did they come out of nowhere? No. Christians were on the receiving end of Islamic holy war for over 400 years. And after 400 years of being on the receiving end, make sure you have your notes out, of Islamic holy war, Christians decide, hey, let's try that. Let's see if it works for us. The pretext is that the Seljuk Turks take over the Holy Land and win the Battle of Manzikert and drive deep into Byzantine territory. And in addition to that, start persecuting the pilgrims going to the Holy Land because Christians are dumb. So, they worship the real God wrong, which is kind of insulting to the Turks. So they hurt the pilgrims. Both of these things causes the Crusades to happen. For example, the Byzantine emperor sends a letter to the world and to Rome in particular, asking the Pope to send help to protect Christianity, even though the Byzantine Empire is outside of what we would properly call Christendom, because it's part of Greek, not Latin Christianity. In fact, there are problems because of the Great Schism between Latin and Greek Christians. Still, the emperor humbles himself to ask the Pope for help against the Turks. That's how bad it is. That, coupled with the Turkish molestation of Christian missionaries, or not missionaries, Christian pilgrims to the Holy Land, causes the West to say yes, but there's something else. The West couldn't say yes if a few things hadn't happened. Charlemagne's accession to the Holy Roman Emperorship and his successors' maintenance and expansion of this empire does build greater peace within Western Europe, and it sets the stage for the redevelopment of cities in Western Europe. This is what really makes the High Middle Ages. The West starts building cities again. Settlements so large that if trade breaks down, most people would die. And all of the things that come with cities, as Paris, as London, and as Frankfurt, and as Rome, begin to develop a sense of genuine urban sprawl. There is wealth enough and peace enough for things to improve, so that there's enough discretionary power in the West to send it eastward. There's also this. Globally, climatologically, the world is in a warm snap. Remember, it's at this time that the Vikings crossed the Atlantic. Iceland is discovered, then Greenland is discovered, then Vinland on Labrador Island off the the east coast of Canada is discovered. And all of these things are possible because of the warmer temperatures. It's warmer 1,000 years ago than it is now. Don't tell me global warming, because the world has been warmer than it is now in historical time. It was 1,000 years ago. And what that warm snap did is it grew more food. So the human race expands in population. Even in a backwards place like Christendom, the human race expands in population. And it's this extra population needing a place to go, that leads to the Viking expansion, because there isn't enough land in Norway, but it also leads to the Crusades, in that you have second sons, third, fourth, fifth, sixth sons. People who can't inherit land in the old country, in the homelands, going out to try to find their fortunes, as well as to serve God and gain glory. So, what makes the Crusades possible from an economic standpoint is the warm snap that creates extra crops, which helps human populations grow, giving pressure for extra people to find new places to do their thing. And many of them choose to go crusading. And this also, again, leads to the growth of cities. So, the First Crusade goes east, and even though they are called by Pope Urban II, Deus vult, God wills it. And Peter the Hermit famously in German says, Gott mit uns, God is with us, which was on German belt buckles in World War I and World War II in their army. The idea of Christians going east, hello, gravity, to save the pilgrims and make it safe for them to go to the Holy Land is very appealing. But the Byzantine emperor invites them to go by land from Constantinople, right through the newly conquered territories of the Seljuk Turks. This area on the Anatolian plateau that was taken by the Turks after the Battle of Manzikert. And the Crusaders punch right through them, go through the Kilikian gates and south to the Holy Land. The Christians are tough hombres, and the Turks have trouble with them. So the Byzantine Empire is helped by this, which is why the Byzantines called for help in the first place. But amazingliness, the First Crusade actually conquers Jerusalem. The Kingdom of Jerusalem is established, the Christian Kingdom of Jerusalem, by the Crusader Knights. And throughout what we would today call Israel, the Crusader Knights established themselves in castles as rulers, and the area begins to revert to what it had been before the Islamic conquest, which is a Judeo-Christian land, or mostly a Christian land, because the Jews had been kicked out by Hadrian hundreds of years before that in the Great Diaspora. So, why did they succeed? Well, A, it was a surprise. The Muslims were not used to being on the receiving end of holy war. They were used to dishing it out. They weren't used to taking it. Also, they didn't think these primitive Westerners could project power the way they did. Surprise! Third, they probably underestimated the Westerners as a bunch of divided savages. But the fighting skills of the Crusader Knights, which are basically Norman, make it possible for the Arabs to be beaten again and again. There's another reason, too. Can anyone remember the outside force that was distracting the Arab armies at the very time the Crusades happened? Yeah.
Persia?
Close. It's beyond Persia.
Mongols.
Ms. Rougeau, can you say it?
The Mongols.
The Mongols! Thank you, Ari. I know you knew. The Mongols. The Mongols, who we're going to study a little later, are the most successful, scary, hairy, barbarian conquerors in human history. They build the largest empire, an empire that stretches from Poland and Hungary in the west all the way to the Pacific Ocean, from the Arctic Circle and the taiga of Siberia, all the way down into India and Persia. These guys were scary, and they were coming. And so many Muslim efforts that would have otherwise probably gone against the Crusader Knights go against the bigger threat, which is the invading armies of Mongols. So Crusaders benefit from this. However, Saladin takes Jerusalem back. Saladin being the great Kurdish leader, Kurdish general. And this prompts the Third Crusade. The Third Crusade is the Crusade of the Kings. Holy Roman Emperor Friedrich Barbarossa goes. What happens to him? Yes?
He falls off a horse and breaks his neck.
Yeah. Horse riding is wonderful, but it's scary. Things do happen. It's not safe. Even if you know what you're doing, things do happen. You get thrown. It's part of life. So he fell, broke his neck in a river, and died. King of France started on a crusade, but he ended up finding a reason not to go. France. And then that left King Richard Lionheart of England, the son of Henry II, the son of Eleanor of Aquitaine, that amazing female leader from the Middle Ages, the famous warrior king who was also homosexual, which is why he didn't have a wife and children. He was too busy spending time with the boys fighting at the front. And Richard Lionheart, when he goes to the Holy Land, ends up facing the General Saladin in a series of battles that are amazingly interesting. If you're interested in medieval military history, study the campaigns of Richard versus Saladin. Study the Battle of the Horns of Hattin. But ultimately, the kings go home. Well, Richard Lionheart goes home. Well, home as in France, the English King territories in France, where he dies. The Crusader Knights stay. But they never take Jerusalem back. In fact, after Lionheart, they're going to basically be on the defensive for the next century until they're driven out completely. If you've ever played any of the Assassin's Creed games, you know that their origins are in the story of the Hashishan, the story of the assassins of Alamun, the assassins I told you about that were plaguing the Abbasid Caliphate. These Muslims were given a taste of paradise before they left on their mission. And their mission was to kill. And they were around during the time of the Crusades until the Mongols wiped them out. Because the Mongols didn't put up with stuff like that. They had their own violence to deliver, and they didn't want competitors. So the great enemy in the Assassin's Creed games, at least the first one, was the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar is a crusading order of knights that is set up to guard and protect the temple, which is the Temple Mount, which is in Jerusalem. So we've got crusading. This is new. I'm writing it down. You probably should too. Knightly orders, such as, this pen is dying. Mr. Dixon, would you please catch this and throw it away? Thank you. Such as Knights Templar. And there are also the Knights of Malta. And there are further the Knights. I can't write. Knights Hospitaliers. We'll start with the Knights Hospitaliers, who eventually become the Teutonic Knights in the north. Warfare is dangerous and people get injured and killed. So one of the things the Crusaders did is they would try to bring barber surgeons along. Barber surgeons were the cutting edge in medicine in those days. That and leechcraft. And hospitals were also set up not just as places to try to heal people, but as places where the people who are wounded can die with some degree of peace, comfort, and dignity. Not die alone, but die with somebody who's comforted. So the Hospitaliers start out as an order devoted to caring for the wounded knights. But eventually they become a militant order themselves because they have to defend the hospitals. Then they have to go out and fight with the knights. And ultimately in Northern Europe, the Hospitaliers become the Teutonic Knights, which become a group of German knights spreading Christianity eastward by the sword. The Knights Templar and the Knights of Malta, who are related to them, are an order of knights set up to protect the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is where the Jewish temple used to be. But remember, it was destroyed by Vespasian and his son Titus during the Jewish revolt of the late 60s, early 70s AD. I'm not talking 1960s, I'm talking actually the 60s and 70s. And this ruined temple was all that was on the Temple Mount until, according to the stories in the Quran, Muhammad goes there at the end of his life and is taken bodily up to heaven at the point on the Temple Mount that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is now located. So Jerusalem becomes a holy city not only to Jews, because it's the capital of Israel, and not only to Christians, because Christ suffers and dies there and is resurrected there, if you believe it, but it's also a holy city to Islam, because that's where the Prophet Muhammad ascends into heaven. So the Al-Aqsa Mosque is built on the Temple Mount. The Christian Knights build a church nearby called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. To the Jews, the Temple Mount is sacred because there's a wall of foundation that's still left called the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. That is the only part of the Temple of Solomon and of Herod that still exists. So to this day, Jews make pilgrimage there to pray and cry for what was lost. That's why it's called the Wailing Wall. So that not only is Jerusalem, not only is the Holy Land sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, not only is the city of Jerusalem sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, the Temple Mount is sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And they're not gonna share well. That's one of the things the Crusade is about. Had the Turks not messed and molested the pilgrims, the Crusades might not have happened. But they did. So the Knights Templar are set up to protect the Temple Mount and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But they end up becoming important knights throughout the Mediterranean and European world. Some of the wealthiest and most powerful people end up becoming members of the Knights Templar. A subgroup of them, the Knights of Malta, take over the Mediterranean island south of Sicily and end up ruling it as a Crusader kingdom for a while. The same is true of a lot of other Mediterranean islands, like Cyprus. There are those who believe in conspiracies. I do not. But there are those who believe in conspiracy theories about how history functions, how it works. They believe in organizations known as the Bavarian Illuminati, which is a Bavarian intellectual club that supposedly replaced George Washington in his second term as president with their leader, Adam Weishaupt. And that's why later pictures of Washington look different from all the others. The eye in the pyramid, which is on our money, is the symbol of the Bavarian Illuminati. It's a symbol of the eye of God, the eye of truth. It's not a Christian symbol. It goes back to ancient Egypt. And there are some who believe that to this day, the powerful people in each of the major countries of the world are members of or in the employ of the Bavarian Illuminati. There are other people who believe that the Knights of Malta or the Knights Templar run things from behind the scenes. Others believe it's the Gnomes of Zurich, a group of Swiss bankers, or the Jews who are running things from behind the scenes, or the Freemasons, which is a group of stonecutters that was supposedly established when King Solomon was first building his temple 3,000 years ago, and that they somehow end up infiltrating and ruling the leadership of the world. These conspiracy theories, and they go on to today. There are groups today called the Trilateral Commission, which is a group of Americans, Europeans, and Russians and others who wanted in the Cold War to bridge the gap between East and West by having the West move 2 steps to the left and the East move 2 steps to the right, so that communism and capitalism could morph and combine into some new form of global government. The Bilderberg Group is another one of these societies that supposedly has all the wealthy people. And the Global Economic Forum is acting like a conspiracy theory come to reality, because over the last year they've begun publicly advocating for what's called a Great Reset, which would strip us of our property rights within the next 10 years and replace money and property with some new global order run by the wealthiest people in the name of saving the planet. From what, I don't know. I'm going to play a brief video that deals with the way these conspiracy theories think the world works. Again, I am not a conspiracy theorist. Close the windows and the shades and turn off the fan, please. Windows, shades, fan. Over there, too. Could you help, mister? Bagel? Fine. And I'll come back to you guys because I don't want a copyright strike from YouTube.